Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Arseholics podcast on a Thursday night. We are live. You've got me, Raj, and Mize here with you. Man City have just played Chelsea, so we can give you some raw feels about that. But Mize, how's it going, mate?
Yeah, I'm all right, man. I'm good. Christmas is over, World Cup's over. Just New Year and all of that. So back to work and everything. So yeah, doing fine in general. But I guess very happy that we're sort of back into the swing of things in regards to like Premier League football. There's a lot to talk about. So yeah, let's get into it.
There is, before we get into it properly, just conscious it's a new year. Happy New Year to everyone, all of our listeners. But also, it's a new year, and it might be the first time that you've picked up this podcast. New Year's resolution may have been to listen to more podcasts from people called Raj and maybe Mice. That might have been a resolution of yours. If it was, really appreciate you guys tuning in for the first time. A little bit of a recap on background. Mize and I, along with Aaron and Nero, who is a fairly infrequent, should we say, participant on this podcast, but the four of us anyway are season ticket holders in the North Bank. We've been going for a number of years, and this podcast started in lockdown, and it was partly, I think it was filling a bit of a void, wasn't it, Mize, of the conversations that we would have in the pub pre and post Arsenal. We kind of missed each other, missed talking about Arsenal, and so we decided to just to do this and click record on our conversation, and really, one of the things that we've tried to do always is bring a little bit about of the match day experience. After COVID, obviously, when we're allowed back in the ground, we really in our pods and our episodes wanted to try and, I guess, add some color to what people may have seen on TV in terms of what the atmosphere was like, some of the things that you notice when you're on the ground, some things that you notice in a game, right? Which you don't necessarily notice on TV, but you do when you're there. So we also wanted to do a little bit of that. And so if it's the first time that you're listening, really hope you enjoy the podcast. Hopefully you'll tune in again. Today you've only got Mize and I. Don't have, usually it's three of us, at least it's three of us, and Aaron is unfortunately, well, no, happily for him, he's still traveling. So Aaron, the diehard Arsenal fan that he is, was traveling in Asia for a little while. He told his family that he flew back for Christmas. In reality, he flew back for the West Ham game. And then he went back out to Asia. So he's in Asia at the moment, and in Vietnam, I think, at the moment. So he wasn't at the Newcastle game either. But Mize and I were. So Mize, before we get into the Newcastle game, it's a bit raw, isn't it, in terms of the result that's just happened. So let's just reflect on that for a moment. So Chelsea didn't do us a favour. They just lost at home to Man City 1-0, the same score that we went to the bridge and won by. I mean, what's your initial feels, mate? It feels really weird, isn't it? Big here, sitting there going, really rooting for Chelsea.
Yeah.
Because in a title race that we're in and they're not. Do you know what I mean? It's really weird.
It is weird. It feels weird rooting for Chelsea, and it feels weird paying such close attention to the City results at the moment. Not something we've had to do for, well, pretty much last 5-6 years or longer than that. So weird, but quite nice, right? Because it means that these big games, we're actually, we're directly impacted by the results. So it's just quite nice that we're involved and we're in the mix. Like initial reactions, I caught, I would say, most of the game, or a fair chunk of the game. Didn't watch all of it and kind of had it on in the background. But initial thoughts, I actually thought Chelsea might get a result tonight. Stamford Bridge is they're generally a difficult place to go. I didn't realize how bad their injury situation wasn't. Like, we were just catching up before we started recording, and they obviously had a couple of other injuries, quite big injuries at the start of the game as well, which must have impacted what they wanted to do. But I think it seemed like a pretty, City didn't play very well in the first half, and they seemed to come out following probably a Pep rollicking at halftime, and came out in the second half basically a different team, it looked like, and the City that we expect the City that we are used to seeing. And, pretty ballsy to be able to sub off Cancelo and Kyle Walker at halftime. I mean, arguably, I'm not saying they are, but the two best fullbacks in the league, definitely playing for the best team in the league. Well, not at the moment, but you know what I mean. And to make that kind of change away, at Stamford Bridge, it's a pretty big call, and it paid off. So fair play. I think it felt like it was a bit of just one of those games where lots of fixtures, lots of congestion, in terms of games. And sometimes there's just matches where if you're going to basically try and win the league, then you need to just get a result. They didn't play at their best. KDB wasn't at his best. Haaland actually didn't score, which is a surprise these days, or any game that he plays in. But they've got the result. They got the 3 points. So yeah, a little bit frustrated. But I think if you'd actually look at where Chelsea are this season, obviously league position wise, manager changing mid-season, all of that, injuries. Maybe we were more hopeful than anything that Chelsea might do something tonight. Maybe a different season, another season or seasons gone by. Chelsea away, is a bit of a tougher game, and maybe they might have got something from it. So, it is what it is. At the end of the day, from an Arsenal perspective, it doesn't really change anything for us because we're in a position now where we just got to just keep trying to do what we're doing and try to keep that consistency and that level, that performance level as high as it's been, and see where it takes us for the rest of the season. That's all we can really focus on.
You're totally right. It's also a game that, when you contrast against Arsenal's game against Newcastle, this was really an occasion where it became very obvious about what the difference is between Arsenal and Man City. When Man City were, it was still 0-0. Between the period of 0-0 and 1-0, they brought on 160 million pounds worth of substitutes on. Yeah. And then when they're seeing out the game, 85th minute, we bring on maybe an El Neni. They bring in Calvin Phillips, 50 million. Just to shore it up a little bit, do some safety in numbers. Do you know what I mean? And it's it's a really interesting contrast because when we get in and we start talking about the Arsenal Newcastle game, I think that's definitely one thing that became apparent. The lack of options off the bench. So Chelsea certainly felt that today, but I guess for them it's a massive injury crisis that they have, and they had in-game injuries. An interesting point I wanted to mention to you actually is on the Cancelo Kyle Walker point. So I read this really interesting article and it's really bad that I don't remember the name of the guy who wrote it. It wasn't someone who I think was a famous journalist or anything, but I think it was a City fan, and he was basically talking about Rico Lewis, and he was talking about how actually, if you've been watching City for a while, like so let's just say from the start of this season in pre-season, like Rico Lewis's emergence and his kind of budging out of other fullbacks in the team is not a surprise, and more so, it's basically a tactical evolution of the team that Pep's been trying to do for ages and is finally being able to do it because of Rico Lewis. And he's basically inferring that that Rico Lewis will essentially be more and more and more and more of a feature throughout this season until Pep figures that it's at a point where he feels like he can fully rely on him even more so than he is doing now. So it's not, and what he was saying is it's not a form thing. It's that Rico Lewis is doing something in this team that none of the other fullbacks have been able to do, any of the ones that he signed in the past, or even the ones that he has now. And he was basically explaining that whenever Rico Lewis has come on, even if you go back to pre-season and the meaningless games, and even if you go just to the sub appearances that he'd had this season leading up to, I think he made his full debut in the Champions League, I want to say. When he's come on, he's played a very, very specific type of role where it's like the inverted fullback role, where he basically goes into kind of, he doesn't actually play as a right back. He kind of goes into central midfield, but more so, he basically ends up being this free role and just operates all across midfield, all across kind of both sides of the wing. In fact, like they're basically the only almost position that he doesn't end up kind of playing on the pitch is centre forward and goalkeeper. The only two positions. Like It's a very, very specific thing that he's been asked to do, and they reckon that this is part of an evolution. So, the point about Cancelo and Kyle Walker. I mean, you're spot on for the fact that they've probably been two of the best, if not the best, fullbacks in the league for a while. But it's so interesting that Man City are at a point, or Pep feels he's at a point where he still wants to evolve the team to such a point where he's evolving it through a, and he's so, he's one of those ideas guys. He's very transfixed on his ideas and how he wants to play football. That despite all their money, and obviously the money helps and all the big squad helps, he's identified some kid from the academy as the only guy who can do this job. So it's interesting to see if we see that more. But I guess playing to what might help us in this title race is, it sounds like Pep is very transfixed on this next evolution of his City team. And he wants to kind of get some of these ideas through and wants to kind of tweak the team that, extra little bit. And I wonder how stubborn he will be to that if City continue to kind of drop points randomly and, it starts looking like it might get a little bit tighter for them than it would. Or do you think that ultimately, when he wants to turn it on, he'll just kind of turn it on and play the teams that he needs to get the results and ultimately, take it away from us?
I don't think it's, to be honest, I don't think it's necessarily either of those. I think it's just more a case of, he knows what to do to win Premier Leagues, and most of these players do as well. And they've just got this, freak up front who's probably going to hit 35, 40 goals in the Premier League this season. But I think it's actually more a case of, if they do keep dropping, obviously they didn't tonight, but if they do have these sort of random results where they're dropping points, it might be more a case of assessing where they are in a couple of months, and the focus might move slightly onto the Champions League, because for obvious reasons, right? They haven't won it. Or Pep hasn't won it with City. City haven't won it before, and it does feel like that is the missing. That's the missing piece of the Pep era at City, and ultimately, I think that's the target. That's like the golden target, as it were. So that's the only reason that I can really see City kind of taking their eye off the Premier League. If we kind of maintain a bit of a gap, or if our gap, increases somehow over the next few weeks, and as we get into the back end of the season, there's possibly a chance that City might start to shift focus to the Champions League, maybe. But then you'd probably look at you look at the fact that they're City, and you look at the fact that, like you mentioned, the bench that they've got, the squad that they've got, they probably won't even need to do that, to be honest. They'll probably be able to compete on both fronts and progress pretty far.
There was an interesting stat that they pulled up on Sky Sports as well, where they basically said that, unlike most teams in history, like City's, if you look past the last few seasons at least, their points accumulation from this point of the season till the end just ramps up. So I think over the past few seasons, around between this point of the season and the end of the season, they average something like 2.7 points a game.
Wow.
Like it's like insane. Like they almost just like click into a different gear from now to the end of the season. So that kind of puts into perspective, right? If we're genuinely going to try and do this and go toe to toe, like, okay, one side is if the past is anything to go by, then we're basically having to look at every game as almost a must-win game to a certain extent. But then I guess there's a point in their minds, isn't it, where, like, to be honest, City so far this season have kind of looked in some ways a little bit more fallible than they have in previous seasons. So despite those stats kind of in previous seasons, like, it's pretty unlike City to be fairly regularly looking like they could drop points at home. So, like, their last 3 games at home, I think Brentford lost, and they just recently drew against Everton. And remember Fulham, they won in the last minute. Like,
yeah.
So I don't know if is it a different City? Like, should we not get too worried based on the past?
I mean, I don't know. Like, I feel like this conversation is kind of premature as well, right? When,
you're just like too, you're too. What's the word? Like, cautious. You've just been burnt by.
I think we all have.
Arsenal so much. I know.
Are you in the what's your mindset then? Are you a bit more optimistic, or are you confident that we can stay where we are?
Not necessarily. Like, I think that I think for the first time in a couple of years, actually more than a couple of years, for the first time, I genuinely believe we're a really good team.
Mm.
And despite, for example, drawing at home at Newcastle, my mind hasn't changed on that. But I think that the only reason why I still think that City will finish above us, and actually this is the only reason at this point, is squad depth. I don't actually even think it's necessarily the experience thing, because I think, yes, the experience thing is great. They've won like lots of trophies and stuff like this. But I think our kind of youthfulness plays into it in a positive way as well. I think there's a bit of fearlessness from Arsenal in that perspective. There's a bit of a kind of, well, we weren't supposed to be doing this in the first place. Like, no one thought we were going to be competing for the title. So let's just, whatever, let's just go out and do it. So there's that kind of, that helps us, I think. But I think it is squad depth, man. And, for them to pull out the players that they were doing now, you're 0-0 and then, you just change it up like that.
Yeah.
We just don't have that at all. And even this window, if we go into this window, and we'll talk about this window a bit later, if we go into this window and we sign a couple of players, it's still like nowhere near as deep as they are. But I do think that this season is still going to be so up and down. Like, I think there's a bit of a school of thought that's emerging amongst Arsenal fans that once this gap starts shrinking, there will be no way back. So it's almost like, the inevitable will happen as it starts shrinking. I feel slightly differently because, as you pointed out, Champions League will start. City also have a number of difficult fixtures around this period as well. So I think it could be fairly up and down. I think the gap might shrink. It might get a little bit bigger at some point. It might, I don't know. These things might happen. But I think what started to alarm me slightly is actually some of those other teams, like, in fact, Newcastle, but Man United aren't as far off as I remember them being. It was
a bit deceiving, wasn't it? But
yeah.
They're back. They seem to be back in it, but they've had a fairly comfortable run in terms of the last few games, right? So kind of games you'd expect them to win. But yeah, like, they've hit form at probably a decent time for them, especially as we've got them in a couple of weeks. But I mean, for me, mate, it's like even, I mean, you're probably getting the same thing. I don't know, but when I speak to mates who are fans of all the other clubs, basically, or all of the bigger clubs, that we basically, as soon as we dropped points against Newcastle the other night, I was getting messages saying, you guys, it started, it's the lead's going to become 5 points again come Thursday night. And, I was pretty calm about it. Like, my response was pretty much just, look, as long to be, focus on what the target was, right? And where we've been the last few seasons. If we get top 4, which, if we don't get top 4 from the position we're in now, that is a big failure. But basically, come the end of the season, as long as we're in the Champions League next season, that still has to be considered a good season, a successful season. Especially when you look at some of the players that we're being linked with, especially when you look at just all the things that we spoke about for the last 2 years with what Arteta's doing and the squad and the youthfulness of the squad, as you mentioned, and these exciting players and so many things that you can get behind, and now we're actually playing really good football. We're playing attacking football. We're scoring goals. We have a way of scoring goals. We have a way of breaking teams down and opening teams up. So all of these positives, I think ultimately, anything even second would be ridiculous, to be honest. When you look at what Liverpool have been doing for the last few years, when you look at how much other teams are spending, Man United, Chelsea, and so on, like, second would be mental and Newcastle, like, second would be mental. So, I think it's one of those seasons where I'm obviously excited. I'm hoping that, there is, I'm dreaming of glory come May. And I'm dreaming of, potentially winning the Premier League for sure. But I think if we do fall off, which I think in the most realistic Arsenal fans think is probably going to happen at some point, or it might just be City, like you said, are just that good. We just can't sustain that level of performance. 2.7 points a game, 2.7 points a game. Yeah, that's crazy. So, like I say, if we can sustain if we can sustain the performance levels to the point that we finish top 4 or keep us in the top 4 for the rest of the season, then I'll be happy. And I think most Arsenal fans will be, on reflection.
It's funny though, isn't it, how fickle we are as fans. You the beginning of the season, the question was all about making top four. And, you know, if you go on social media, you'd see loads of Arsenal fans who are saying, oh, if we don't sign this person, if we don't sign these positions, then we're not going to be in the top four. And how can
Yeah.
Arteta do this? How can Eddie do this? All this kind of stuff. And now the same people are basically like, you know, we've got a chance to win the league. They need to sign this player and that player. If they don't sign these players, then we're not going to win the league. And then, you know, they'll have cost us the league. It's crazy, isn't it? When you think of it that way, right? Like we, like you say, I think, you know, we never thought that we'd be in the title race. That, you know, no, I know we joked about Aaron and not making a comment, you know, in one of our first episodes of the season, but he realistically didn't think that we were going to be a title contender this season. None of us did. The fact that this is happening is remarkable. And you know, we're just such a young team, and we're going to go places. So let's talk about the Newcastle game, mate. So you know, we were both there. Geez, it wasn't the greatest weather, was it? But you know, it was a real good buzz about the ground, though, wasn't it? Before the game, it was a nice buzz, wasn't it?
Yeah. I mean, kind of the buzz that we've been seeing quite a lot. Not just this season, but probably last season as well. Like I said before, there's fans are kind of back on board with the club and with what the team are doing. So every reason to be happy. I mean, look, if you can't kind of get yourself up, given that we missed 6-7 weeks of Premier League football, right? I think fans like me, I'll speak on behalf of myself. You know, I definitely just appreciate going back to the Emirates, you know, going back for the West Ham game, going back for the Newcastle game. It was just nice to be back at the Emirates and watching live football again. So yeah, no, it was a good buzz. I think everyone was. It was one of those. It felt like a big game before the game. It felt like first versus third, even though it's Newcastle and even though it's Arsenal, two teams that haven't been in those positions at all, if at all, over the last few seasons. It still felt like a big game. It felt like a heavyweight game, if you know what I mean. And I think there was a bit of an anticipation about, let's see, Newcastle, you know, from a Newcastle perspective, it was like, right, we're going to the league leaders. You get an opportunity to see what Newcastle are really about, you know, a proper test for them. And I think for Arsenal, it was like, okay, we've had some good results. We've had some really good results this season, but obviously coming back from the World Cup or coming back from the break, West Ham and Brighton beating both of those teams. But okay, now this is a big challenge. You know, Newcastle don't concede goals. Newcastle have only lost one game this season. What can Arsenal do? So I think it just had that, you know, and it was a night game as well. So had that anticipation of it being a big game. Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, for those of you who are watching live and or watching this recorded on YouTube, you'll see we've got the teams up here on the screen. These so this is a, you know, again we're bringing the innovations to you. So Mize has just mate, he's whipped out all of his management consulting experience and just come up with a slide deck for this show to start the year. I mean, these slides are beautiful. I have high standards as an ex-management consultant myself. These are beautiful. Fair enough, you know, some of these like graphics, you know, are stolen from other places, but the way that they've been presented, I mean, it's real top quality stuff. I mean, I feel sorry for you if you're listening on Spotify or Apple or whatever and you can't see this. It's genuinely beautiful. It's
the
popping
nicest
out
thing that anyone's ever has said to me probably this year, mate. So, so thanks for that.
Well, look, I hope it continues that way. No, honestly, it looks brilliant. So what we're looking at right now is a team, are the teams out here, and so you know, Miles, I think, as you mentioned about, you know, them being a defensive unit. I mean, one of the things that, you know, just completely shocked me when we saw the teams out is how massive they are as a team, and specifically Sven Botman, Dan Burn. I mean, I tweeted that from behind they just look like clones, like two giants who have just been cloned, like massive units, like huge, like like freaks, like, you know, like just built, like they're not even skinny, they're not like crouch skinny, they're like real big guys. And then, you know, add people like that, Bruno Gomes, who's also like no, sorry, not Bruno Gomes, Joe Linton, who's a you know, a proper unit as well. They look big, didn't they, mate?
Yeah. We both said it to each other. Basic units, absolute units, especially Botman, because I think we've seen Dan Burn come to the Emirates before, and I think noticed the same thing. He's huge, but when Botman was coming up for corners in the first half, because Newcastle were attacking our end in the first half. When Botman was coming up for Newcastle corners, just like I think it was Martinelli on him, if I remember, and it was just like, what a mismatch. Like Martinelli's not a small guy, like he's not a Cazorla. He's probably 6 foot or something. He looked tiny. He looked tiny compared to Botman. So yeah, they've got some decent physical presence in their team for sure.
And we're still kind of, we're persisting with balls in the air through the game, which, to be honest, all things considered, given the size of their team, I think we didn't do too bad a job with competing. But it did. I think it's one of those things, mate, that before the game, I hadn't watched too much of Newcastle by way of, too many 90-minute games. So you see the stats, you see that they've got a great defensive record. They've got the best defense in the league in terms of, goals conceded. And I wasn't necessarily sure as to why that was until I saw them, until I saw them at the Emirates, where they're massive and they're really well drilled and they just concentrate for 90 minutes. Teams have tried to, it felt like teams have sort of tried to do this at the Emirates. Like they've tried to defend, West Ham tried to do it, just like low block it. But ultimately, the pace we play out, the talent that we have, it's going to unpick most teams. I was so impressed with just Newcastle's discipline throughout the game.
Yeah. It was interesting as well because obviously, like you said, they've not conceded many goals, but before the game, like you turned to me and said, right, predictions. And I said words to the effect of, I think we're going to smash them. Like I genuinely thought we were going to, not to say that we didn't, but I thought we were going to carry forward with this, like the momentum that we've had. We start games, we've been starting games pretty kind of fast out of the traps. And we have those periods in games where really kind of just like our attacking players are just turning it on and teams can't seem to cope with it. Like the West Ham game, for example, and Brighton as well,
And we've won every home game this season.
Yeah, and that as well. We've been really good at home. So I kind of felt like Newcastle just wouldn't be able to contain us. I wasn't saying we'd thrash them as in it would just be a 5-0 walkover, but I meant there'll be a period in the game where we'll really, really turn it on and we'll get a couple of goals and the score might end up being something like 3-1. And that wasn't saying that wasn't kind of dismissing Newcastle as a decent team or as a good team. It's just I was so confident in what we've been doing for the last few months, basically. So yeah, it was really interesting that, and I kind of expected. So the other thing I sort of thought was going to happen before the game in terms of how Eddie Howe was going to approach it was, I really did think that he was going to give it a real go in the sense that they're sitting in third. They've obviously had like fantastic results, but this was, like I said before, this is their biggest test, right? This is like the litmus test for them. Are Newcastle a serious team or not, kind of thing? And if they'd come to the Emirates and got folded and completely destroyed, a lot of people would have been like, they're probably not going to, last the course for top 4 or whatever their goals are for this season. And so I just thought it was almost for Eddie Howe as a manager, and as he's been there for a little while now, it was his opportunity to come to the league leaders and say, right, I'm gonna basically go and try and win the game. If I can't win the game, we'll take a draw. But I'm actually going to come out. I'm going to let the team come out and play, as opposed to doing what they did, which was sit in and try and sit on a 0-0. So I was somewhat surprised that that's how he approached the game. But in hindsight and on reflection, based on how well they did defend and they got what they wanted out of the game, I'm not like, in hindsight, it made sense, and it's obviously a fantastic point for them. So similar to what you said, mate. Like I was super impressed with them defensively. They like Trippier's actually a very, very good like player. I know he does really well for England, and he probably doesn't get as much credit as he deserves for whatever reason, but he's actually a very good player. He did I said this to you after the game, he did a really good job on Martinelli. Was still trying things, and I feel like he was still somewhat dangerous, but not as effective as he's been. He didn't get the opportunity. He got on the ball quite a bit, but I don't think he got past Trippier very often. And similarly on the other side, Saka, I think in the first half there was a moment where, there was like a passage of play where Saka, I think he just destroys Dan Burn, knocks the ball past him, gets to the byline and puts a crossing or whatever, pulls the ball back. And I think from that point on, they pretty much just doubled up on Saka. And I think it was Joe Linton, who was like the second player, just kept coming across. Every time Saka had the ball, it was Dan Burn and Joe Linton. And Saka still had a really good game, to be fair, and he was still dangerous. But they obviously tried to nullify the threat. Probably our two biggest threats. So yeah, no, like you say, it was a pretty impressive and very, what I'd say, solid performance from them. And yeah, like it'll be interesting to see how they like. It's quite interesting to see that they're able to come into a game like this, set up the way they did, and play the way they did. But then probably going into the next game, I don't know who they've got, but when they go into other games where they're almost now expected to win, they can probably they probably have enough going forward to play the way they've been playing for the previously. Yeah, so it's quite interesting. They've got like both facets to their game now. So probably means that they are like a serious outfit now.
Yeah, I agree. Because it felt like a lot of their players had to curb their natural instincts. I mean, Almiron, I felt like probably had a game where he was, he didn't really enjoy, and he was incredibly ineffectual. But I think that's because the tactics necessitated them to play a different way, and so it will be interesting as kind of you say, to see how they kind of flip between different modes of different approaches, because that's probably what they're going to need to do this season. But it's I respect them a lot for it. I guess at the end of the day, we were complaining at the time, and I think I still felt quite raw about after the game about how they had approached it, because there was a lot of time wasting. There was a lot of shithousery kind of thing that was going on during the game. There was a lot of fouling. Felt the referee. I felt the referee was not being very consistent, or just maybe a little bit kind of haphazard with how he was issuing his fouls and yellows. And if you look at the stats of the game, like we've got on the screen here, it would just it basically tells a story of a superior team at home trying to kind of go up against a low block. Basically, that's what the stats sort of show. They show a home team with a high amount of possession, more shots, more passes, fewer fouls. Basically, that's what it shows. But in practice, they probably did do a lot of other things right. Like you said, you mentioned about Kieran Trippier doing just a really good job on Martinelli, and just how they dealt with wingers. I think another thing that to be called out is Odegaard was not as effective as normal, and I think in retrospect, I think they just did a very, very good job on him, and put a lot of pressure on Odegaard. They didn't really give him that much time on the ball, didn't let him dictate the game as he normally was. And I think that similarly, kind of with what they were doing to Xhaka, they were just rushing us a little bit. So I think the point on Martinelli, for example, I think Martinelli, it felt like didn't have his most effective game. But now looking back on it, I think a lot of that was I recall many times the passes to him being a little bit short, or a bit too long, or a bit just kind of mistimed, and him having to do a little bit more work than normal, like basically just not receiving it in as a quality of pass as we've been used to seeing him receive. And I think that's basically because of the pressure that Newcastle put on the likes of Xhaka and Odegaard and even Partey. So I do sort of credit them in that, but I credit us as well. Like we really kept going, didn't we? I mean, we were really, the kind of effort was still there. That we were knocking on the door. Yes, a lot of those crosses that were going into the box seemed a little bit pointless at times, given how big they were. But we nearly got there towards the end, didn't we? There were a couple of moments. Yeah. Eddie had a good chance.
Yeah, no, he did. And to be fair, it was a good chance that he, I think he did everything he could have done with that chance. And it was just a good save. It was a good save from Pope. But I think this is the thing, mate. Like we basically said it already. If, like you say, we almost did it. We just needed a little bit more, and that's probably the situation. That's exactly the kind of game where you need a little bit more off the bench, or you need that little game changer. You need like an ESR, maybe a Mudryk. That kind of player, maybe another striking option. If Jesus was fit, then it would be Nketiah coming off the bench and you're chucking on a second striker kind of thing. That's where sometimes, well, that's where it definitely did cost us. Once, maybe it didn't cost us as such, but maybe that's the thing that we're missing. Having those options to come off the bench and just maybe change it up a little bit.
In terms of what we had, though, sorry to interrupt. In terms of what we had, would you have done anything differently in hindsight?
As in,
in terms of
Who?
subs and in terms of what
Oh,
was
as in
offered
who we
on the
had on
pitch.
it. Sorry.
Yeah.
Like, it is interesting because like, I was gonna sort of, yeah, I mean, I wanted to kind of ask you really if you feel it's probably, I'm kind of probably asking the same question back, because I think the obvious option was Vieira, right? As in,
Mm.
I think the next option would have been Vieira if we're going for looking at our potential attacking changes.
Yeah, if we
But
go back to the team sheet here, right? The subs that we had: Turner, Tierney, Tomiyasu, Holding, Lokonga, El Neni, Marquinhos, Vieira, Butler, Oyedeji.
yeah, so I think of those, only two stand out as potential game changers: Marquinhos and Vieira. And
Mm.
maybe Marquinhos is still a little bit raw. You're probably sacrificing one of Saka or Martinelli or Nketiah to bring on Marquinhos, and probably doesn't make sense. But Vieira for Xhaka maybe might have been an option. Not saying Xhaka had a bad game or anything like that, but that might have been the most obvious sub. But I guess what I wanted to ask you was what would you think Arteta's thinking was around not changing it? Because there were, like, on Twitter, for example, people are saying, which I think is a bit of nonsense. That's his message to the board, that we need to strengthen in January. We need players in, or he obviously doesn't trust the options that we've got. But I don't think it's either of those. But I just wanted to get your thoughts on what you think it might have been, what the reasons
So
might
I
have
agree
been.
with you. I don't think it's either of those. I think it was a combination of reasons. Like I think I said at the time that if I was Vieira, I'd be pretty annoyed with the fact that if you're at home, it's 0-0. You're trying to unlock a defense, and you're not going to bring him on. He probably feels, isn't that what I'm supposed to be here for? Like, isn't this the situation in which I'm on the bench for
It
exactly
was
this?
quite a physical game as well, right? And that
Mm,
could have played into Arteta's thinking. Just like you said, Newcastle, a massive team. There were loads of yellow cards in that kind
yeah,
of first half. In the first half, so maybe it was just that kind of game where he didn't feel Vieira would be able to
yeah,
potentially physically deal with it.
maybe so. And I think again, it goes to another point I think you were touching on, which is like, who is he really going to come on for? Because okay, fine. So Xhaka, fine. Like, maybe that was an option, but like you say, there's a physicality point there, and maybe Arteta thought, well, look, I don't want to lose this either, right? So I don't want to leave us kind of exposed. In the form that Odegaard is in, not just because he's captain, but in the form, he's arguably the most on form playmaker in the league at the moment. Like, do you still want him in the pitch, even if he's being a little bit ineffectual? Like, don't you still want him there? And then, actually, you do need some tricky wingers to, Saka and Martinelli again are in good form and operate very well in those wide areas. Would Vieira have made sense coming on from one of them? I don't think he would have. So yeah, maybe it was just a case where there was just no one obvious to bring off. Now, had we had ESR, or if we signed Mudryk, if we had Mudryk, then that's different, because actually one of those players could come on for, Saka or Martinelli or even Eddie. Like, they could have come on for one of those, and then it's a bit more like for like, and you just it kind of makes sense a little bit. So maybe that was that, but I think, but it still did hit home, mate. It did feel like a bit concerning that it's a 0-0 at home, and there was no one on the bench that we thought that could just change it, just do something a little bit different.
Yeah.
And so I did feel that concern, to be
I mean,
honest.
if ESR had been fit, if Reece Nelson had been fit, there are probably two options that 5 minutes to go. Well, ESR I'd probably say would have come on a bit sooner, but there are
Yeah.
options that you've got towards the end of the game. Definitely players that could make an impact. We've seen it with ESR previously last season. We've seen it with Reece Nelson this season. So, they're two guys that we're unfortunately missing at the moment. So maybe things could have been a bit different there. But yeah, I think overall, I'm sure every Arsenal fan probably agrees, and Arteta probably agrees. We are light. We are light in terms of that. And again, just coming back to sort of ambitions for this season, I think how that is what you said it right. That is probably potentially what what might transpire to be the reason that we don't win the league, or we just can't sustain what we're doing now, because you do need like you do need a squad. You do need a proper squad to win the league. You can't do it with 12 or 13 players anymore. So So yeah, it's a bit of a shame, but it is what it is. We'll just have to see what we do in January, hopefully.
It's also one of those that you always analyze the game based on the result, right? And there were a couple of moments where, we could have scored. There are a couple of good penalty shouts that we could have had. We get those penalties, at least let's say one of them, we convert it, Arsenal with 1-0. You reflect on the game in a completely different way,
Very true. Yeah.
So, maybe we shouldn't get too hung up on it, but like where does that leave us? So I think we've got a nice league table here, which has just been updated since the game that's just finished. So what do we have here? We've played 17, Man City for 17, and we've got a 5-point gap. I mean,
it's still
that's
mental.
still mental. Yeah, it's still
looking at that, it's still crazy.
It is, and Newcastle 9 points behind, but have played a game more, and then and there is a gap. Even to Man United, I say the gap is it's not as big as I thought it was. I think the way that I thought was if Man City didn't win today, say if Man City had lost. Which wasn't outside the realms of possibility. If they had lost away at Chelsea, they would have had 36 points, and Man United have 35 with the same amount of games. That's crazy. Like
that is crazy. Yeah. Very interesting.
Kind of came out of nowhere. But Spurs, I think Spurs there in fifth. I mean, do you want to talk about Spurs for a second? Just to let's segue into Spurs land. I mean, it feels like we could talk about Spurs right now for about half an hour, but just to avoid, I mean, they've got 33 points because they absolutely smashed Crystal Palace. Not really sure how, given the first half they were so bad.
Yeah.
But 33 points, it's it's a fair way away from us. Not a million miles away, but it's a fair way. Any thoughts on Tottenham right now? Because their fans I saw today have, I think, their main supporters group have written a statement or issued a statement to the board, basically saying they have massive concerns with the direction that it's going in currently, and they want answers.
Wow. I mean, look, Spurs fans, I don't know. I'm sure they think we're a funny bunch. I think they're a funny bunch because I mean, I'm not really sure what. Yeah, okay, fine. I can understand why they might have concerns, but ultimately they're still in a position. They're in the Champions League. They're in a position in the league where they could finish top four again. Like, I don't know what, as a Tottenham fan, what else you're hoping for. Like, so, fair enough if that's what they've chosen to do. But I mean, it's just very weird with Tottenham. Like, they're very hot and cold, very, very hot and cold. So it's kind of hard to predict what they're going to do next. They've obviously got this trait now of starting games pretty poorly, generally going behind and then finding a way to come back. Obviously, that was a bit different the other day. Well, it wasn't, to be honest, because I don't think they played very. I think I texted you guys, WhatsApp you guys, maybe half time or whatever, and I was like something along the lines of, this could be the match that retires Conte or Conte resigns, because they looked awful in that first half. They looked really, really bad. I think Palace looked like the team that were going to score, and obviously that all changed in the second half. And I mean, this is the thing, right? They're one Harry Kane. I think, even Son has not been as good this season. Kulusevski is injured at the moment. It just feels like you take Harry Kane out of this team, I'm not really sure what's left. Like, I don't know. I don't think they'd be able to sustain top four or fifth even. I think they'd really fall down the table. But ultimately, like, there is a big gap between us and them, but we've got them next week, right? So I'm not saying, I don't know. Like, it's one for me. I mean, I know we're not talking about Spurs yet because we've got a game before then, but like that Spurs game, just kind of looking ahead a little bit, that game for me is a game where we just can't lose. Like, it's a potentially one of those games where it just gives Spurs a lift off for the rest of the season for them. Like, if they beat us again at the Lane. So, and given the position that we're in, if we get, I mean, look, obviously I'd love to go there and win, but if we can get a draw, I'd say if we get a draw, I don't think that's the worst result. And it just keeps that very, very big gap between us and them. And it means that we're just focusing on, kind of holding City off, and they're focusing on trying to sneak back into the top four. Whereas if they win, the gap closes, it's a 6-pointer essentially. The gap closes quite a bit, and kind of changes perspectives for the rest of the season, right? So yeah, I know that's like jumping the gun a little bit, but
no, it's not at all, because it is important. But, yes, you're right. We've got Oxford in between, but come on, like 1 3/4 eyes are on that game, aren't they? And it's like you say, it always, like it always is with the derby. It feels, but the last couple of seasons, it feels like we go away to Spurs at really important like conjunctures of the season. I think, and like
Yeah,
you say, if we lose, I don't know who is it. The City have got next in the league. Do you know off
I
the top of
don't
your
know.
head?
I don't know.
Okay. Well, if we lose and Man City win, then the gap's 2 points, and then it's mentally that's tough because that's just one result. Was one result away from flipping,
Mm,
and then then you start kind of well, you start wondering. Then you got Man United who are coming up now, and we'll have a look at the fixtures in a second. But and like you say, Tottenham, you don't want it to propel them, but we. It's tough as well because you kind of want to just you wish it wasn't a derby in theory, right? Because otherwise, all you've got is a situation where you've got a very good team at the top of the league playing a team who are very ropey, home or away.
mm,
But it seems to make no difference. And Unai Emery's just gone there with Villa and just humbled them completely. You think we're better than Aston Villa. We should be going to Tottenham, and if we turn it on, if we play just like this isn't a derby and they're just another team,
mm.
we win that game. We're a much better side than they
Yeah,
are this season.
it's going to be interesting as well because yeah, exactly that, right? If we can like not play the occasion, because that's what happened last season, right? When we went there and lost, when we needed to just not lose, like that was just a must not lose game. And we went there and yeah, we just completely got sucked into the occasion, and and the atmosphere and the crowd and all of that, yeah, we basically just sort of folded, really, didn't we? So I'm hoping that we've learned a little bit from that experience and the St James's Park experience last season. That those kind of pressure games last season where we just didn't either turn up or mentally we weren't right, whatever it was. Like I'm hoping that we've learned a little bit of a lesson because I'm very, very glad that this game is not at the same time as it was last season. So I'm glad this is not like the second or third
It's
last
not
game of
going
the
to
season.
define this. It's not going to,
Exactly. Like
yeah.
there's time to come back. Like if we do have a bad result, there's time to come back. But look, I think at the end of the day, it's kind of like my attitude towards it is quite similar to the Newcastle game in the sense that, like you say, if we go there and play our game, on paper and so far this season, we are the better team. And we've shown that we can pretty much beat anyone. So it's just to get, they've got to look at it as another game and just try to perform at a higher level as possible. And just try to play smart as well, because you know what Spurs are like what players like Harry Kane are like, and they always get their kind of annual penalty against us. So we just got to be smarter than we were last season as well. Again, not play the occasion, but just be savvy when it comes to everything, basically. The 50-50s and just like trying to Spurs players trying to wind us up, all of that kind of stuff. We just need to block it all out as much as possible. So it's going to be, yeah. I mean, I'm not really sure what to expect in terms of a result. I know we're not predicting the game now, but I'm not really sure what to expect because, like you say, like their Spurs can be really ropey, and they've shown that. But it's a derby, isn't it? At the end of the day, so who knows what's going to happen?
Agree, and as you say, we'll preview it properly after the Oxford game. But our fixtures that are coming up look like this. So for those of you who can't see, we've just got the fixtures up on the screen. So we were away at Oxford next on Monday, Monday the 9th of January. Then we're away at Spurs on the following Sunday, followed by Man United at home the following week, and then Everton away, home against Brentford, and then home against Man City. So it's kind of a bit of a mixed bag of fixtures, really, because on one hand, we've got Oxford away, and with the greatest respect to Oxford, you expect that even if we rest our main players, we should still be winning that game. And let's talk about that in a second in more detail. But then the Spurs Arsenal, very tough. Home against Man United, yeah, I mean we generally win that game, but it's tough, and Man United are in a much better place. Away at Everton, Everton have been struggling this season, but they get a decent result every now and again. They just drew with Man City. Brentford at home, again, because we're at home. We're Arsenal, and we very rarely, very, very, very rarely don't win it. Aside from random games against Newcastle, maybe but it's Brentford, and actually they are a bit random as well. And then obviously City, which is huge. What do you make of that fixture list, Mize? Because I think during this period, although we don't have it up against us on the screen here, I think City have got quite a packed set of fixtures. They've got more games than we do. So because I think they've got is it the Carling Cup that they've got both legs of the Carling Cup kind of wedged before this?
Oh, wow. Didn't know that.
Yeah. I'm pretty certain they do. And so I think that's Chelsea twice, right? I think they played Chelsea twice. So maybe I've got this wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's the case. Pretty sure that's the case. Anyways, they've got a tough like chunk of fixtures.
Yeah.
So what do you think when you look at that? I mean, does that fixture list scare you? What are your thoughts?
Not really. I mean, we've done this so many times before, where we've looked forward to fixtures and picked out games where we say, that's 3 points. It should be 3 points, and it hasn't. Just doesn't work that way. It hasn't happened that way. I remember Everton away last season. Was it last season? I think it was last season. Damari Gray, was that last season? Last minute winner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think Everton were rubbish. They were rubbish last season as well. They were in the middle of a really bad patch of form, and yet they still beat us. So I mean, look, in terms of like on paper, it feels like it's a little bit like crunch time. Like there's some seriously massive games in there, but I think if we can get through those first 4 league games.
What does that mean when you say get through? What does that mean? Those 4 games before City.
I mean, like I said, I think Spurs is a must not lose. I don't think we have to go there and win. It's just a must not lose. So I just looked up. So City have got United this weekend. Next weekend. So that's like, who knows what could happen in that game. But yeah, I just think you just don't want Spurs to come back into it, because I think we're looking at, say, was it 11 points before? Like 11 points currently, is it? Or 9 points? What is it?
11 points, but 11. Spurs played one more.
Well, yeah. So, you start, if the gap goes into single figures, then they've probably got a bit of hope that they can maybe catch us, and the pressure then goes back onto us. So I think it's must not lose. United at home, we really need to win that game. I think we need to win that. I think home games, like if we really are going for the title, even as good as United have been since the break, I think you've got to have pretty strong home form, and I think that's a game that we need to go and win. I think Everton we should go and win, and I think we need to beat Brentford. So I think if you're talking about getting through that period with if the target is basically trying to retain first place, then, which obviously it is, but you know what I mean, right? Then I'm sort of looking at 10 points from those 4 games.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with it. I think if it is okay, if we genuinely think that we want to try and win the league, then I think it is 10 and at a minimum 9. But I think if I look at that set of fixtures, if we came out with 2 wins and 2 draws, I'd feel like, do you know what? Maybe that's fair. Like, there are a couple of tough Spurs, Arsenal, like you say, like, I mean, if we came out with a draw, I'd probably be quite happy. Obviously, I want us to win, but I'd probably be okay. I'd be okay with the draw.
Yeah.
And then I think out of those next 3 games, it's just maybe there's and then obviously, I say this, and then obviously a lot depends then on Arsenal City, because I genuinely feel like we could lose one of the games leading up to Man City. We could drop points in a couple of those games, but we could beat Man City.
Yeah. We can definitely beat Man City. I mean, it was last season, wasn't it, where it was like a Rodri last minute winner. We weren't that, we had played so well that game, and we've come on even stronger since then. So no, we can. I mean, like, I'm really, So I'm very much looking forward to that City game. But I think the main thing for us going into the City game, whatever kind of points tally we how many points we get from those 4 games, the main thing is like the state of the team, the state of the squad. Injuries. I know Jesus isn't going to be back, but you look at the bench, like we've talked about a few times now. The next players to come in is there's a bit of a concern there, really, right? We might do some business between now and the City game, and hopefully we do. But again, it's probably going to be a
Windows
player.
open. Someone can come
Yeah,
in today.
yeah, a player, maybe two.
Yeah.
No one's expecting kind of, us to bolster the squad that massively. So, like if we're a couple of key players down come the City game, which is very possible because a number of is now until the end of the season. There's just going to be so many games. Like if Partey's
Yeah.
injured, if Saka's injured, for example, whatever like whoever it might be, you go into the City game and then you're looking across and they've got, like you pointed out, Grealish coming off the bench, Mahrez coming off the bench. They can play or don't play Cancelo. They can play or choose not to play Kyle Walker, for example, whatever. Like, they've got all of these options and all of these alternatives and different things they can try. It makes it quite tough. But again, if we're in a position where we don't actually have to, we might be in a position where a draw might not be the worst result. You kind of just want to maintain the gap, maintain that distance. So who knows? Like, we might get to that. We might get to that mid-February game, and it's just a case of right again. Look, we'll go out to win the game, but the most important thing is if you can't win it, don't lose it. Basically, what Arteta said after Newcastle, and then you just have to be so consistent and just on it with all of the other games, right? And just make sure you're just churning out win after win. Then, yeah, that's probably going to be our kind of almost best chance of trying to win this title if that's what we're trying to do. But like I said before, man, like just keep me in the top four. Just that will be enough for me this season.
I agree with you. I'm conscious of time, but like there's two things I want to touch on. So maybe we just give each of them 5 minutes and try and rattle through. One is literally Oxford. So 5 minutes on Oxford and 5 minutes on transfers. So Oxford come out this weekend. What is it? Is it straightforward for you, Miles, in the sense that do you rest the first team?
I think you have to now. Like, I'm not sure he necessarily will. I'm not sure Arteta will rest everyone because that probably means, I'm just thinking in my head who would come in, but that probably means a couple of youth players maybe. And I'm not sure if he'll necessarily want to do that. Like, because last season, who did we go out to in the cup? Was it the
Nottingham
cup?
Forest
When they were in the championship. And I remember like Patino played that game and a few other players and it just didn't work. Like, and I'm not saying, in the grand scheme of things, it might not be the worst thing to go out of the cup, but as a fan, I obviously don't want us to go out, right? And want to win the FA Cup this season if we can. So I'm kind of thinking he might keep one or two more senior players in. But like the good thing is that we have options when you think about like Turner, Tomiyasu, Tierney. I'm assuming they're all going to start.
Yeah.
Vieira, El Neni.
Will Cedric not get a farewell game?
I don't. I'm indifferent to it, but if Arteta wants to do that, is he definitely leaving or?
Well, it seems fairly strong links. It sounds like he's just kind of negotiating the right thing. But yeah, but even like your point around that he might not rest everyone. I mean, you can't really get because with centre backs, like he kind of ends up if he rests Gabriel and Saliba, then he can only do Holding and maybe like a Ben White or Tomiyasu at centre back. Like I don't think he's going to find a random. Like if Matt Smith a centre half, I don't know. Is he going to bring him in? I don't know. Like he's not going to.
And that's probably the position. One of the areas you might want to just keep someone like Rob Holding's obviously a senior player. I mean, to be fair, all of those defenders that come in, Tomiyasu, Tierney, they're all experienced players. So it's not like you're bringing in kids. But yeah, I mean, that might be a position where he might just keep Gabriel at left centre back, maybe. But I think generally it will probably be like I'm hoping Saka's nowhere near the squad, for example. Like I just don't want him because it's away. Yeah, it's Oxford away, right? Like I'm sure their tactics going to be to try and rough us up and all the rest of it, and try and play a physical game. I have no idea how Oxford play football and what kind of football they play, but I would assume that's going to be what they're going to try and do to us. So don't want Saka anywhere near the pitch. Ideally, don't really want Martinelli anywhere near the pitch, but I can see them maybe being on the bench to come on if we really, really need them to. But I feel like Arteta hasn't really been afraid of, like, he's not really, I don't know if he's not afraid or he's just like, obviously, look, we don't know, right? But it feels like there isn't really a concern yet of players going into that red zone. Like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
There's not really that worry yet, or it's just a case of he doesn't feel like he can make the changes and still get enough of a sufficient performance level out of those that second string basically. But
Yeah, agreed.
like a lot of players are just playing 90 minutes in the league, so and then they're not even getting 5 or 10 minutes off. So I wouldn't be, like I said, I wouldn't be surprised if he keeps a few senior players, more than likely on the bench, but he might start a couple of them. I mean, Nketiah might have to start.
Yeah, that's the thing I was wondering about that. What do you think he'll do there? Because what option does he have? Unless he genuinely gets a kid to come and play centre forward.
I can't. I mean, you're looking at what Marquinhos, Vieira, ESR's not. I can't. He's not going to throw ESR in, like, even if he's back. But he's,
So there's a good chance that someone like a Nwaneri will play. Someone
right.
like that. There's that Cozier Dewberry.
Yeah.
And I think Kalon Edwards is kind of the other kind of centre forward from who looks fairly promising.
Yeah.
But like, because it's a risk though, because you can't. What happens if you play Eddie and he gets injured? What are we gonna do?
Massive risk. Well, we've got to sign a striker in,
Yeah,
in about
exactly.
10 days or whatever it is. So 2
Yeah.
weeks. So yeah, that I mean, that's the thing. There isn't. I don't know. What do you do? I can't see him starting a kid up front. Like, that's a lot of pressure, because the names you mentioned, like, these guys are not even getting minutes like in the league, obviously, and maybe they came on like in the Europa League. I don't remember, to be honest, or they've got some minutes in the Europa League. But you're just throwing these guys in cold and expect it. We still need to win the game, right? Like, still need to win the game. Just put the game to bed as early as possible and make the changes if we, whatever. Like, just basically then manage the game from there. So yeah, it's going to be quite interesting. I have a feeling he might just have to start Nketiah because there's just literally no one else. And just hope and pray that nothing happens to him.
Yeah, definitely. Because if something does happen to him, I can see a certain Ukrainian club adding another 50, 60 million onto a price tag of someone. Talking about that for 5 minutes, Mike. So look, like, it's the biggest news story with regards to Arsenal transfers is the quite public pursuit now, I guess, of Mudryk. It's both parties have basically, almost come out and said that it's they're negotiating and blah blah blah. Shakhtar seem to be really bullish, and apparently we made a second bid, and it hasn't been clear as to whether that second bid's been turned down. Don't really know what the status is. We know that the player is gagging for it. He's basically on his knees. Don't think you can do much more than what he's doing to come. We know that there's been rumors of Chelsea kind of trying to hijack the bid. Now, getting another couple of injuries in the game just now, well, I don't know if they'll take that kind of even more seriously and really be going for it. What's your feeling on this one? Do you feel like we need to kind of get it done, whatever, or
I've started, my kind of ethos, as it were, when it comes to transfers now is, I, as a fan, don't really care like how much we spend anymore. Like, I use most Arsenal fans have this thing where it's like, oh, why are we paying 60 million for this guy? It's way too much. We shouldn't be paying anything more than 40 or whatever. Like, Arsenal fans turn into like accountants and financial experts. And I used to be one of those, right? But I just don't really like, for me, it's like, I guess it's because I've got so much trust now in what we've done in terms of transfers in, the players that we've brought in, the risks that we've taken, the faith that we put into certain players. If it's a case of Shakhtar are just asking for too much and the club feel he's not worth that level of investment, then fine, we walk away. Like, it's probably a different scenario now than we expected it would be back at the start of the season, in terms of he potentially could be the difference between first and second, or second and third, whatever, or winning the Europa League or not, for example. But at the same time, like, I'm pretty comfortable with the club just, basically taking the right call. And it does feel like Shakhtar like, I think he's played like 30 professional games or something like that in his
not very
career.
many at all. Yeah,
it's not for the money they're asking for, right? And apparently the reason they're asking for so much is based on similar types of players, positionally.
Anthony being cited, and
and
Grealish being cited.
And I mean, that's City and Man United putting that money down. So, it does. I think it, like, when we last spoke, which was a couple of weeks ago, I think you were very confident that that deal would happen.
Mm.
I wasn't so much, because I felt like it was quite a lot of money that I didn't think the club would do in January. Now, a couple of things have happened since then, since we last spoke, which is one, we've had some really good results and we've maintained our position at the top. And I do wonder if that might just almost not nudge, but it might just make the club think, well, look, if we're not going to do it now, if we're not going to just almost take the plunge now, and let's see if this is what basically I'm kind of thinking they're thinking no regrets pretty much, because last January, we didn't invest, we didn't bring in a striker, we didn't do anything, and it ultimately cost us, right? We slipped away at the end of the season, and I'm just thinking, I'm kind of hoping that the club are thinking, well, we need to do some sort of business, because if we don't, we might look back at it at the end of the season and have some regrets. And I think they've obviously identified him as the guy, and that's fine. I don't think we'll get absolutely, I don't think we'll go. I don't think we'll pay what Shakhtar are asking. I think that's kind of obvious based on the offers that have gone in. But it sounds like we're just trying to get a price agreed and see if Shakhtar will accept. So I'm fairly hopeful it will happen. But yeah, the Chelsea thing did worry me a little bit. Like the links with Chelsea did worry me a little bit. Like you say, another couple of injuries. I wonder if that changes things for them.
Would you do anything? Is there anything else that you do in the window?
Well, I mean, I'd probably buy a whole new bench. There's obviously, I think realistically, I want to say central midfield, but I don't know if there's anyone like El Neni as a player that comes in for 2 or 3 or 4 games isn't a bad option. He's obviously not a Partey, nowhere near. And I think if you play him for long enough, you play him for 10 games, there will be those games where you just realize, okay, yeah, he's just not as good. He's just not as good in every department. But I can't see us signing another big time midfielder. I can't see us signing a Bellingham, a Rice in January, right? I don't think anyone's expecting that, right? Yeah. So I'm kind of like, well, it would be good to bring in a squad player, but I think it would probably be someone at that kind of level, an El Neni level, but it'd be more for the numbers and, bolstering the squad and just having that backup in case we need it in central midfield. Obviously a striker would be amazing if we can get someone in, but again, how do you bring, we had this debate last season, right? When Newcastle signed Chris Wood, it was quite interesting because when Chris Wood came off the bench the other night, I did think, you know what, despite me and you probably saying, he's not the player that we want to sign for the reasons we talked about last January, hypothetically, having him on our bench as a bit of a wild card type sub wouldn't be the worst thing. A player like that, right? So if there is a striker out there that, is like an option B when we needed the other night, we needed to bring someone on and, hope the ball breaks in the box or there's a cross or a set piece or something and gets on the end of it. If there's a striker like that, then yeah, I'll be more than happy for someone like that to come in. And if they're happy to kind of sit on the bench and play a bit part, because these games now, once the Europa League comes back, there's just going to be so many games.
Yeah, exactly.
And if we go,
it's hard because you need to find a player who is really happy to play that very specific role. They're going to have to know that they're not even going to be necessarily second choice.
Yeah,
they're more of they're basically there as a bench player, but they're actually probably arguably going to get more minutes than sometimes your second choice would, because you're going to have game situations where you want to change it up. Now, if you've got Gabriel Jesus on the pitch and you need a goal, okay, you could bring Eddie on, totally, whatever, but he's not necessarily adding too much of a different dimension,
Yep.
So you want someone like, but like you said, it's just so hard to. It's like who.
It would. I mean, I guess the great position that we're in is we're obviously pretty attractive to come to right now, right? Because you're basically saying to any player, you could be the guy that comes and is the difference that helps us win the Premier League, or wins the Europa League this season. So, if you're looking at kind of lower clubs in the Premier League, or basically, like clubs in the mid-table teams that might have a striker that would be more than happy to come, there might be a deal there to be done, maybe, but it doesn't look like we're not really being linked with anyone. I think the only link is like Vlahovic, isn't it? I think there was like talk about we might be backing for him because whatever's going on with him, but I don't know, man. Part of me is like, screw him. He didn't want to come to us last summer.
I'm that too.
Last January.
I think they've made it so clear. Arsenal made it so clear. Gabriel Jesus is number one, and so I think that it's going to be very. I can't see a situation where we go sign another striker who would, kind of be fighting for that number one spot. I don't think. What I see more like that's why I think the stuff like the Mudryk deal makes more sense, because that suddenly gives you a bit more options, because you could have situations where then Martinelli could come and play central if he needed to play central, and then you've got someone like Mudryk who play there. But I'd really I'd really like to see us sign a central midfielder, a backup central midfielder. I think that the drop off is just too big with these two. I think
any names?
Well, if we were to go get Tielemans in January, I'd be pretty happy with that, and I think it would make sense, because I feel like it wouldn't necessarily be a massive drop off at all from Xhaka. There are some people who would argue that Tielemans would be an upgrade. Maybe in some elements of his game, he is. Like, I would have definitely had said that at the beginning of the season, but the fact that Xhaka is just taking it to his level, whatever. I don't know too much about like Danilo from Brazil, but he has people sort of raving about him. I do think that it should be someone who is of the quality where it's just that the drop off isn't there. Like, it might be a little bit of a drop off in some respects, but it's not how it is right now. And that makes me concerned a little bit about Lokonga. I feel like he's been with the club for a little bit of time now, and Arteta clearly doesn't really trust him yet.
Yeah.
And I'd be really interested to see where that goes. So part of the reason why I'd quite like to get another central midfielder in is partly because I feel like Lokonga could leave in the summer.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I
it's
think
not really worked out, has it? Yeah.
It's not really worked out. And I think in the summer that, we are probably going to make central midfielder, I imagine it's going to be quite a focus, but I think we probably need two. We need someone who's going to be like a rotation sort of player. And then you need someone who is going to be a successor to someone like Thomas Partey. Like if, we can talk about this in another episode, but if Declan Rice is available and if there is a chance for us to get him, I totally think we should be getting him. That's your central midfield. Like that's that position nailed down for years. But I guess we can talk about that another time. We've been chatting for a while, and we haven't had a recording since pre-Christmas, right? Right? Is that right? No.
Do we talk about the West Ham game? I can't remember now, to be honest.
I don't think we did.
It's been a while.
Yeah, I think we did. So yeah, look, man, it's been great chatting. Look, everyone who's sort of tuned into the live stream, but anyone who's now listening on recorded, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Please like, share, subscribe to this, rather. We'd really appreciate it. And it's still, despite the fact that we didn't win, because we're really used to winning, it's still a fantastic time to be an Arsenal fan right now, isn't it, Mice?
Yeah, man. We've got to just enjoy it. Enjoy the ride. We all remember some pretty bad times over the last few years. So this is one of those highs that whatever happens at the end of the season, you just got to enjoy it and kind of soak it in a little bit, and let's see what happens come the end of the season.
Agree. And a very quick Oxford prediction, Miles. I presume, should we just keep it as simple as we think that we're going to win?
Yeah, 3-0 Arsenal.
Okay. I think it's the joy of the FA Cup, the charm of the FA Cup means I think Oxford might score, but I think it'll be a 3-1.
Anything other than Arsenal win, and Jesus, I mean, yeah, I don't even know what league they're in. They League One, League Two? Oh, you're on mute, mate.
How long have I been on mute for?
Just like 5 seconds.
Okay, fine. So
you said 3-1, and Oxford might score.
Okay, good. Fine. So Oxford United are in League One, so we got it right. Well done. They just they've just they've had a bit of a random few results recently. So they just lost their most recent game. They just lost at home to Exeter.
Okay.
They beat Charlton though prior to that, but then got battered by Ipswich, who were doing quite well in League One to be fair, but they got battered by Ipswich and then drew with Sheffield Wednesday before that. So you know, we really should win.
Yeah, I'm not sure what we're taking from that analysis, but yeah, okay.
Well, I guess what we'll say is they're not going into this in very good form. They've won just one game out of their last 4 games, so they're not in great form.
Yeah,
let's hope for the best, eh?
As long as man, can't be dealing with an upset.
Me too. All right, everyone. Thank you very much for joining it. Enjoy your week, and look forward to Oxford. Take care, guys. Thanks, Mize.
Cheers, mate. See you guys soon. Bye.
See ya.